or I'll unmute you for question. But Michael, if you could just take us through sort of the evolution of your career from pre-reporter to reporter to author.
Well, kind of a long story. I'm born in Philadelphia, but I was raised in South Florida, and I was always I changed schools several times. I went to 5 schools in 5 years, and that turned me into a reader because I was by myself a lot, and I became a voracious reader. And at one point, I was a witness to a crime, and I spent a night with a detective in a police station, and that kind of flipped my my reading habits, I guess you'd say. I started reading crime fiction, true crime, all that kind of stuff, and at some point, I decided I wanted to try to do this. The books that most influenced me, even though I'd never been to Los Angeles and was in South Florida, were Raymond Chandler's books. And when I discovered those and read them all in a row, I was about 19. I said, this is what I want to do. And I talked to my parents about it because at the time I was in an engineering major in college. And now I wanted to go into creative writing. And my father suggested I go into journalism instead if I really wanted to get into crime fiction, because I could get a press pass and I could get into police stations and courtrooms, and I could meet detectives and the kind of people I want to. And he said, maybe that would put you in the best situation to take a shot at doing this, because it is a long shot. And so I did that, and I became a journalist, and I worked in South Florida for 7 years. And I got a call from the LA Times to come out here. And I did that. I worked for the LA Times for 7 years. And in the last 2-3 years, I was always writing fiction at night. Some of the people I covered at the Times claimed I was writing fiction in my stories, but I beg to differ with them. But I was writing at night. I wrote a couple books that were learning experiences. They never were sent out. And then finally, I got a book. My third book that I wrote was the one I sent out that got published. And I had an overlap of writing books and staying at the Times for 3 years, and then I left. And I've been writing books ever since. And so like this shelter at home, work from home, it's been something I've been doing for 30 years. So it's, I can't say I've been in any kind of a hardship situation, because here I'm in my office, I work from home, I write from home. And so I've been pretty lucky in this situation.
Now, we have the 7th and final season of Bosch starting very soon, right? What's the date?
No, it's the 6th season.
Oh, 6th season.
That's starting, and then we're going to do one more. So we have this year, comes out in, I guess, in 2 Fridays. And then we'll do one for April of 2021. And
how have you found that process, writing for TV versus novels?
It's writing, so I've been a journalist. That's the kind of writing. I write fiction, novels. That's the kind of writing. I'm involved in television. They're all forms of storytelling, but it is storytelling, and they all have different things about them. It's a group effort. And so, like I said, I've spent 30 years working by myself in a room. And so it's been a welcome change and a fun change to, I don't do it full time. I visit the writing room of Bosch several days, very often, but never like for a full day. I kind of sit in. I help form the overall, the blueprint, I guess you would, of the season. And then I rely on the showrunner and the writing staff to fill out the details. So I really have the best of all worlds. I can be there when I want, and I can leave when I want. But I do spend more time in the writing aspects and the production aspects, because I really know nothing about production. So when we're filming and I go, I'm just like standing there watching, not having any real input, other than maybe like nodding to the actors and saying, yeah, that was good. But the truth is, what do I really know about acting? I guess you kind of feel it's good when you see it, but you never know for sure.
Right. Now I'm going to open it up to Dick Ebersol and Susan St. James, good friends of mine, but I want to first ask you so they can prepare to ask you a question. I wanted to ask you about the having your books translated into different languages. We had a funny conversation just about the translators and that whole process. And I think it was the Italian guy who had a funny letter to you.
Oh yeah. Well, I've had. It's weird. That is the key thing. Like I'm published in many languages, and obviously I don't even speak a second one. I only speak English. Luckily, my agent in New York grew up in France, so he's always been able to check my French translations and make sure they're good. But a lot of the times you're just relying on your publisher, and sometimes your publisher doesn't speak English, so it's you always wonder, and sometimes things are not happening in a country. Like with my situation leading up to the Italian story, I was like going gangbusters in France and Spain, but for some reason I wasn't selling very well in Italy. And what happens is often translators will send you an email and ask you for help. Especially my books, they have all these LAPD acronyms and all this kind of police slang and so forth. They'll send you an email for all these questions about helping them translate these things. And I got this one from my translator in Italy, and it made very, very little sense in terms of the questions. And then at the very end, rather than saying like best regards or cheers, he wrote, "So give me 5, Gianni." And so then I kind of realized that he was not really into the idiom of English, and there might be a problem there. And so this was expressed to my publisher, and my publisher was not offended at me, offended that I wasn't getting a good translation. So she said, and she spoke perfect English, she said, "I'll translate your books from now on." And then from one book to the next, my sales took off, and that was a lesson learned. It's really about the translation and how accurate they are to what you've put into the book, and just the flow of especially dialogue and so forth. So that becomes really important.
Okay, now I'm going to mute myself, but I'm going to send it over to Dick Ebersol and Susan St. James. Good friends. Dick is a TV legend, as you know, former chairman of NBC Sports, started Saturday Night Live with Lorne Michaels, and Susan is a great actress. And they are big Michael Connelly fans. So I'm going to see if I can do this. And can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And
the floor is yours.
We're here isolated on Maui, week 11. We're exceptionally lucky, and we've used this time to catch up on our second run through all of the Bosches. And as you talk about maybe not doing any more of the Bosch TV miniseries, please tell me that you're going to keep writing Connelly till the day you leave us.
Keep writing Bosch.
Yeah, I think so.
Bosch. Well, yeah, writing Bosch.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. No, I mean, I turned 65 next year, and a lot of people, my friends growing up and so forth, they're talking about retirement. And I have that, that affliction of being a writer that I don't think I can just turn it off. So I still feel like I have a lot to say about some of these characters like Bosch and Ballard and Mickey Haller. So, I might slow down a little bit, but I don't think too much, because I think right now I write at a pace that just feels very comfortable to me. What I think I'll do is probably withdraw some from the Hollywood stuff, because that is time consuming, and just go back to being sheltered in place and just writing my books. But the pace.
Well, I think, Michael, that's why those shows are so good, is because you work so hard at them. You don't just hand the characters over and then say, well, I hope it turns out. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to give them up when you've been writing about them a long time. Up until production was halted because of the virus, they were working on a Lincoln Lawyer TV show, and I was going to that. I was spending mornings visiting the Bosch writing room, and then I'd go in the afternoon to the Lincoln Lawyer, and then it was like I had to get up at 4 a.m. just to spend a few hours writing my next book. So
Oh my God.
it's like
But you struck gold.
Well, my agent says it's a champagne problem, and I get that. But at some point, I gotta slow that down a little bit.
Well, you
I'm
struck
looking
gold
around.
with Titus Williver.
Yeah, I think he's been great. He doesn't look like the guy I've written about in the books, but I would like to say he looks just like him on the inside, because I really think he's captured the essence of that character.
Me too.
I'm
He's-
looking around the room and I see a couple, more than one author besides you, Michael. Steve Russian. I'm gonna say a lot because I don't see that anybody's raising hands, so that might not be available. I'm gonna unmute Steve Russian here to say hello to him. Preeminent sports writer, Sports Illustrated columnist, and just a great guy. Steve, hello.
Hi, Sam. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I just read in January, I picked it up in London and for something to read on the plane, The Big Sleep by Chandler. And when I was in high school, I started reading. It was probably way too much for me to know as a 17-year-old, but Joseph Wambaugh's LA novels. And I know Chandler was the big influence. What about him and what about those books were so influential to you?
Well, I should mention Wamba. To me, the biggest three influences were Chandler, Ross McDonald, and Wambau. And it's weird, they all wrote about LA or Southern California, and I'd never been here. And, so what I knew about Southern Cal, I didn't come here until I was 30 years old and came to be interviewed at the LA Times. That was my first time here. And there was just, all three of those writers, it wasn't really about the mystery. In fact, I have a hard time remembering any of the mysteries. It was about the characters and their grip or sense of place here. And they were all masters of it in different regards. And Wambau is just fantastic. And so when I reached the point where I wanted to I'm being a reporter, I'm meeting cops, I'm picking up some of the milieu of that world that you don't really see on TV and movies and so forth. And I wanted to try to and get some of that in there. I really consciously was thinking, what if Raymond Chandler and Joseph Wambau got together and created a character? Because one's the private eye outsider, and one writes about cops who feel like they're outsiders, even though they have an insider's job. And I wanted to put those together, and that's really one of the key influences into how Harry Bosch came into being.
And in The Big Sleep, I often couldn't keep up with what was actually happening in the whodunit aspect of it. But LA, both in Wambau and Chandler, is such a character, Los Angeles itself. And I grew up in Minnesota, seeing Los Angeles on TV and wanting to live there. It felt like the future or something as a kid. And I think that's what drew me to them too, were Los Angeles from afar, more than the mysteries themselves.
Yeah, I mean, they imbued some kind of sense that what was going to happen in our world or our society might have its starting point in LA, and there's an excitement about that. And then if you throw in a mystery or a crime, and you throw in a character who is willing to risk themselves and what's close to them to do the right thing, all these things, especially when you're 19 years old and first read this, it's really intoxicating, and that's what really turned my head and made me pursue this world.
I'm looking at my parents. It's under Susan Farmer there, and it looks like my dad's coming from the afterlife. He's got the Golden Gate Bridge in his picture. I'll ask my dad and my father-in-law if they have questions. So hang on one second. I'm sorry. And if you have a question, if you could physically raise your hand, I can then call on you. Let's just see here. Sorry. I'm going to go to my father-in-law right now, Gary Olson. Gary?
Michael, so nice to see you. We've tried to play golf and it's never worked out, but hopefully we'll find a way with Jack and Sam to play golf. One thing I was going to mention, it's interesting. My wife reads you on Kindle, and we're like a twofer. I listen to your books on on audiobooks. So, every time we read one of your books, you get paid twice. And I think that's really terrific for you.
Yeah, that's why I'm a member of Wilshire Country Club.
One of the things I really like about what you do is I'm a fan of Renee Ballard.
Mhm.
And I thought that was so clever, bringing her in to give you, another part of the tree. And the same thing with the Lincoln Lawyer. Uh, those are, as you said earlier, it's different perspectives of what you do and people whose function interrelates with the crime scene. I think that was really terrific for you to
Well,
come up with and branch out.
yeah, I mean, I wasn't clever. It was just something I had to do. I try to spend time with the kind of people I write about. So I have a small cadre of LAPD detectives that help me with my books, and I know some defense lawyers that help me with the Lincoln Lawyer stuff. And one of these detectives, I see Richard Winton is here. He probably knows Mitzi Roberts, who's just a incredibly undaunted and fierce homicide detective for the LAPD, maybe one of the best ones they have. And I've gotten to know her over the last 10 years. She's helped me with books, and she's a consultant on the Bosch show. And then one day she was telling me about her quick way to get into the detective ranks was to accept being a midnight, late show detective, to work the midnight shift in Hollywood. And she started telling me stories about it. So it was nothing clever about it. It was like, A, this person, I have to harness her character, and B, these anecdotal stories she's telling me are just fantastic. So if you just read that book, almost all of it's true, but fictionalized. They're all stories that happened to Mitzi Roberts before she got elevated to being a homicide detective. With the LAPD. And so it's like one of these things that kind of falls fell into my lap, and I'd be an idiot not to take advantage of it.
I want to transition now to Richard Winton from the LA Times. Richard, let me take your mute off. If you have a question.
Yeah, Michael, why didn't you, give a little insight. While you start reporting for the LA Times, essentially you report for these books because you have details which very few people know outside of like a very inner loop of the department. And some of your books are more insightful on the department than even my articles.
Well, I mean, that's a great compliment, because I've stolen from your articles for years, and I appreciate your reporting. But I did find what happened was I was having some beginning success with my novels, and I went to my editor and said, I want to take a 6-month sabbatical to see. I was reaching this point where, how do I get to the next step as a novelist? Could I improve if it was my 100% focus and I wasn't going to being a police reporter by day and then writing my novels by night? So I took a 6-month leave of absence to see, and I could see that my writing was way better in my novels. It improved because it just had my complete focus. But I did go back. I promised I'd go back, but I only lasted like almost a year, less than a year, and I had to leave. But I hung on because I had that press pass, and I could go into Parker Center, and I knew detectives, and I have to say I falsely thought I needed that access to feed my books. And then when I finally made this decision, the art of what I'm doing is more important than that access, and I quit, I suddenly realized I had better access, because when I was a reporter, everyone knew the deal that, like, you can trust me and I can trust you, but if you do something wrong or something happens, I got to write about it, and I can't pull any punches. And so that, I think cops, detectives mostly, held a little bit back from me. And then once I was no longer associated with the LA Times, it was like the gates open, and I started getting way more insider type stuff that doesn't necessarily belong in a newspaper, but it's great to harness as obstacles in front of a detective like Harry Bosch. And, so I try to keep in touch with that stuff. And I've been doing this a long time. So some of the first generation of detectives that helped me get retired. And now I've moved on to people like Missy Roberts, who still keep me in the loop. And I've just been very fortunate to have their help. But I think, and this, when you talk to detectives, whatever you do in life, you probably feel like people don't understand it. You're misunderstood. And if you're sincere about saying, I just want to get your life right, what this costs to do this job, what are the obstacles, what are the dangers, all that kind of stuff, and you're sincere about it, people will open up to you. And that's what's happened with me. And I've been lucky, so I can take that stuff and put it in my books.
Okay, I'm going to go to Jamie Aaron and then Todd Harmonson. So Jamie Aaron first. They've both raised their hands. Jamie. Having a hard time hearing you, Jamie.
Hey, any better?
Yep.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank y'all for doing this. But Michael, you mentioned slowing down in the next year or so, but you've got the Jack McAvoy book coming out soon, and then another Ballard and Bosch book. So what prompted you to speed things up this year?
The Jack McAvoy is a reporter, and I've always been able to write those books quickly because there's a process. If I'm writing about Harry Bosch or Ballard or Mickey Haller, they do jobs or have pursuits that I don't have myself and don't have that experience. So it takes time to think, what would Harry Bosch say? What would he do? And I might have to call somebody, or I might have to text somebody or email them. And that makes that process longer. When I write about a reporter, I just say what I would say. I do what I would do. And of course, I make myself a hero, but unfortunately, I never solved any murders when I was a reporter, but the guy I write about has solved a few and caught some bad people. So there's a fantastical element to it, but just writing the McAvoy books go very quickly. I've only written 3 or 4 of them, but they always go quickly. And every time I've written a McAvoy book, I've been able to write a second book that year. And that's what happened this year.
Okay, Todd Harmonson. Hold on a second, Todd. There we go.
Right. Hey, Michael. And thanks again for doing this.
Yeah.
With McAvoy, I was wondering, in part, you can portray journalists in a way that in the Bosch books, especially, you get his perspective on what we do, and it's always a little jaded. Is this kind of we can defend what we do a little bit, what your upbringing was in the business? And then I just want to follow up on that with, does Ballard keep you young? Because she keeps Harry young, it seems.
Yeah, I'll go backwards. Yeah, the Ballard, I'm writing about someone way younger than me, which I haven't really done in the past. And so that's kind of fun. And so I'm really drawn to that character lately in the last maybe 4 or 5 years of my writing life. She's really had my attention, and the moving her into books with Harry, I think, has been a good split and a good just a good feel to him for me. And that's also influenced by the TV show. Most of the early Bosch books, you're just in his head and you're seeing him and you see reporters, and it's all filtered through his experiences and what he thinks about that job. And then when we got to starting the TV show about 7 years ago, the showrunner, who's the head writer, the first thing he said is, we have to expand these other characters. We can't have Bosch in every scene. We'll kill the actor. And also, it's just different from books. You have to spread out the storytelling. And that somehow has influenced me, because I've been spreading the storytelling out in the Bosch. Now Bosch is with Ballard. The last book has Mickey Haller, Ballard, and Bosch all together. And so I think that's obviously I've influenced the TV show, but influence is coming back. But as far as the reporting goes, yeah, it's usually I look at reporters through the eyes of whatever character I'm writing about. So it is refreshing when I finally get around to writing about Jack, because it's his viewpoint of the world and some of the people that are, judging him and so forth. I think in that, when I talk about the TV show, I don't think the TV show has treated reporters correctly. And you'd think, well, aren't you in charge of all that? And I do push things, and I do help try to bring them more into line with what I think the reality is of that job. But sometimes it's hard. But I remember being so humiliated. I was interviewed by somebody at the Washington Post, and I can't remember whether he said this to me or he put it in the story, but he said I had betrayed the tribe with the TV show and how it treated reporters. And I felt very bad about that. And that did spur me. Some people say, do critics really have any influence? Well, with me, they do. And so it did make me try to be more cognizant of what we're saying about reporters. And then when you look at what's going on in the world today, and this era of fake news and the enemy of the people and so forth, that was the direct reason or inspiration for me to write this book that's coming out at the end of May. Just this idea that I wanted to show how difficult the job is nowadays, with the situation of the journalism business or the newspaper business, and just wanted to show somebody doing a very good job, or trying to do a very good job under these difficult circumstances.
I'm going to go to Scott Eklund and then to my dad. Scott, you're unmuted there?
Yep, I am. Thank you, Sam.
Yes.
Michael, thank you this was such an unexpected surprise to get Sam's invite. I love this series, and one of the things I always wonder about, and one of my favorite shows is Breaking Bad, and I was just amazed at the arc of the show. And when you go back and watch it a second time, all the loose ends that are things that seem insignificant in the beginning, and everything gets tied up at the end. I'm just wondering, for Bosch, and without giving anything away for like the finale, are you trying to bring in a lot of stuff, or kind of take more of a simpler approach? Or I'm just curious about how that whole arc it works for you, or how it's going to work in terms of, such a character with so many stories, that you've told with Bosch.
Yeah, well, we got lucky in that me and some of the other producers, the head writer, showrunner, and a few key people, we got a sense that we were going to get canceled at the end of the 6th season. And so we asked, we're their longest running drama on Amazon. We've never been over budget. We've never missed a deadline. So we're a good partner with them. But, it's a streaming platform, and they're trying to get people to sign up to Amazon. And so the reality is I can see why they would not want a show to go on and on, because it will do its job in 6 seasons or 4 seasons instead of 10. And if they cut us, they could make other shows and so forth. So we understood all that, but we went in and made a presentation that said, let us have a final season and let us write to the end of the season. And my books are going to go on, and Harry's going to go on. But this gave me like a very cool chance to do something that's bookended, that has a beginning and it has an end. And they agreed with us and gave us the 7th season. And so we're in the writing room now for the 7th season, which, if everything gets better in the world, we'll start filming in August. And then it will come out around April of next year, and that will be the end of it. But it changes you. So we've gone back and reviewed all the 5 seasons that are, and 6 is in the can, but we're looking for things to draw forward, and we're looking for things to tie up and to bring back some characters we haven't seen in a couple of years. And it's changed the way we've looked at it. and it's kind of made it a lot of fun. It's bittersweet because it's the end. Like right today, I'm going to write the last episode, and I was outlining it today, and there's just some stuff that I'm just so looking forward to writing and then filming. But at the same time, it's the end, so it's going to be tough. I mean, I'll go on and I'll write about Harry Bosch and I'll write books, but we have a crew. Our turnover on the crew has just been amazing because people that live in LA don't really love going to Albuquerque to make shows and so forth. So we've had like 90% retention on our crew and our cast and all that for 6 years now. So it's going to be really tough when, like, it's a little city, it's 200 people, and it's going to end. It's going to end in November. If we start in August, it will end in November, and that's going to be very tough. But I think the last season is going to be our best season ever.
Okay, I'm gonna go to my dad, and then if you could physically just wave your hand if you have a question, because it's a little confusing how to ask him here. But Dad, your background is all. It looks like you've been playing with the green screen.
Okay. Hello there, Sam.
The Invisible Man.
Everyone. Michael, I've certainly had a lot of enjoyment reading your books, and I wonder, I've really got many questions, but in particular, how do you start out writing a new book? Do you have an outline for the entire book, or do you have a particular episode that you want to elaborate?
I don't outline my books. But I don't start a book till I have a good sense of how it's going to start and how it's going to end. And, my books run about 400 pages. So I have about 80 pages of knowledge. And then I start and I see what happens. But I'm constantly throwing out a net and talking to people in these worlds. And they're all good storytellers. They all have good stories. And I've been lucky. I keep getting stuff that inspires me, or that I realize, I can take that and I can use that here, and so forth. So I build the stories, as I go. But I have the light at the end of the tunnel. I see where I'm going. I need that for sure. And that's essentially how I've been doing it my whole career. I'm a huge rewriter. Early in my journalism career, I worked in Fort Lauderdale, and this is when the newspaper business was fat and happy. And I worked for an all-day paper, and I did crime news. And so sometimes I would have to write the same story 4 or 5 times a day, sometimes with no new information, but I had to make it seem like I had new information. So I became, I think, a really good rewriter. And that's what I have taken into my books. So I would go through my books at least 3 times rewriting, and I would never show anyone my first draft because it's way too long. There's too much information, and then I pare it down as I go through it 2 more times. And it's that process is where it comes together for me, and I think that's what really counts. It's not. You just asked, do I outline? Well, maybe I do outline, but my outlines are usually 450 pages. And then I have to knock it down to about 400 to turn it in.
Michael, do you have time for a few more?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to Dick Ebersol again.
Michael, when you write Harry now, is Harry in your head the fellow you started writing about years ago, or is Bosch been taken over by Titus's plane of him? How do you sort through that?
It's interesting. The guy in the book is about maybe 12 to 15 years older than Titus, and the guy I've been writing about quit the LAPD about 4 or 5 books ago. The Titus character is still in the LAPD. So there's enough separation that I still in my head have an image of the guy I created many years ago. But what's interesting is they just re-released my first book on audio, and they brought in Titus to do the audio, and I listened to it. I don't like to reread my books, and I haven't reread my first book probably in 25 years. I acted like I did when we were adapting it for the TV show, but I was really going off of memory. but I started listening to this just to see how Titus did with it. And then I just kept listening to it. So I just basically have reread my first book. And it struck me that the character of Bosch he's evolved, but not too much. Some of the things he talks about or feels in the first book are still key elements of his being in the books today. I mean, I think he was more black and white back then. He saw a black and white world, and now I think he's more of sees a gray world. But his, that bedrock code about everybody counts or nobody counts, that was with him back then, even though I didn't mention that till about 5 books in is when I came up with that. But it was in him in that first book. So I was really happy to, first of all, Titus did a great job. And you can tell where he's doing other people's voices, like he was doing Robert Duvall as somebody, I can't remember who, but it's just a really good audio book and a really good recording by him, and that helped along the way. But I was really pleased with it to know that the character's still online all these years later and is kind of remaining true to what's in his DNA.
It is kind of odd though, because I went back and listened to the first ones, trunk music, and they're read by somebody else. It's after seeing all the Bosches, go, who's this guy and why is he reading this book? It's really funny. It's a different interpretation. I'm sure you've always chosen your readers, right? Even in the beginning?
Well, no, not really. At the beginning I had zero leverage. They just did it. And then they did 4 or 5 with one guy, and then they tried some other people, and people were upset because they were used to the first guy. And I've always it's kind of like on the TV show where I'm involved in the writing, not in casting and things like that. Although I do take credit for Titus Welver because I suggested him and they ended up getting him. But for the most part, I try to stay within my expertise. And so I've never said to anyone in the audio division, this would be a good reader until recently. And, and at some point I said, why don't we get Titus to do the books? And I did have some influence on who did the voice of Renee Ballard. So I may be overstepping my boundaries, but now I have the leverage to do that, so I do.
Yeah, because she comes in, the last book, she's there too, and she reads, and he reads. And it's funny, when she reads and he comes in, she reads his voice. And then when it's her chapter, his chapter, he reads her voice. It's kind of fun. I enjoyed that one. That was a lot of fun. Those things are hard to do, those reading performances. They're a special skill.
Yeah.
They're really good.
Yeah, you know it when you hear it. Somebody who's a good reader, and they might be people you've never even heard of, but they can really do it well. I mean, I probably listen to more books than I actually read, because when I can be reading, I can also be writing. And so most of my consumption of books is when I'm driving or walking or exercising or something like that.
Right.
So there's a lot of really good readers out there.
Okay, our next question is from Steve Horn, who's legitimately the best headline writer in the sports business, and followed by Chris Stone, who's our executive sports editor and former editor of Sports Illustrated. So let's first go with Steve Horn.
Hey, nice to be on. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, Michael, very nice to speak to you. See you. I love the books. I just wanted to comment. I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to comment. One of the things that always struck me on your books was one of the first ones that I read was about how working at the LA Times, the police department had to be very concerned about reporters looking in, and the stuff was covered up because they didn't know who was looking in. Now you don't have to worry about that anymore, since we're now at the airport and the building's not there anymore.
Yeah, that was a true story, actually. There was a lieutenant, I have to say, he was pretty paranoid, but he was in charge of the cold case unit, and he would close his blinds because he thought like Richard Winton was like over there with binoculars or something, looking through the windows. But yeah, I mean, I always say, like, I'm not a great novelist. I'm still a reporter. I take these stories, and they're true stories, and I find places to put them in my books, but I'm not making up a whole lot of stuff. I'm just throwing out a big net and seeing what I get and figuring out where it fits into a story.
That's great. The only one other thing that I wanted to say actually was to Dick Ebersol, who I'm sure doesn't remember me, but we played in the Scott Coffer Saturday Softball League many years ago, a couple of times, and played out there with him. We had a great time. And also to Sam, I appreciate you having Jim Murray's book behind you there, which I wrote the headline for, The Great Ones. So I'm actually working tonight. I'm working on tomorrow's paper. So I'm probably going to have to sign off now because I have to prove some pages. And I'm just not saying this because Chris Stone is on the line. But I'd just like to thank you. It's really great. And this is great, Sam. Thanks a lot for doing this.
Yes, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Hey, one thing that I'd like to throw out before you get off for conversation. I have strong feelings about whether or not the big sports should resume again. My feelings, as much as I miss them, I think as long as we're locking down states to protect people in our country, the idea of 70,000 people in a stadium without some kind of vaccine or something that would really take away the doubt that it's a safe experience is a strong enough reason not to resume play. And I know I probably fly in the face of what the president's trying to do now, but I just think common safety should be at the top of the list right now. How do you feel?
I agree with you 100%. I don't think, I can't see it really coming back until like you say, there is a vaccine. We're still trying to put out a sports department. I'm just a very small cog in that and just trying to hang on for another year until retirement or so.
It's well worth waiting. Retirement's fun.
Okay, so we've got Chris Stone, our executive sports editor here, and I've just unmuted you, Chris. I think. Did I? Oh no, there we go. There we go. Can you hear me? Oops. I'm sorry. Sorry, Chris. Start over.
All right. Hey, Steve, we need you to get back and make sure that newspaper gets out tonight. But no, stick around. If we're late, it's on me. Steve Russian, great to see you. Steve is an old colleague of mine. I haven't seen Steve in years. This isn't where I expected to see him again. But anyways, hey, Michael and Sam, thanks so much for hosting this. And Michael, perhaps you answered this, and I apologize if you already did, but at the beginning you mentioned that growing up you developed an interest in crime and true crime at a young age, and one of the big catalysts for that was witnessing a crime. Is that something? Can you share the crime with us?
Yeah, I mean, I've shared it in interviews and all that. I was working in Fort Lauderdale. I was in high school, and I had this job as a dishwasher at a kind of a convention bureau type thing. So I was driving home like midnight, very late at night, and I saw this guy running, and he wasn't in jogging outfit. He was wearing regular clothes, and I saw him hide something in a hedge. I was at a red light, and I just saw this guy run by and stick something into a hedge. And I don't know, I was 16 years old and curious. So when the light changed, I made a U-turn and went to the hedge and pulled out what he stuck in there. And it was a shirt, and it was wrapped around a gun. And while I'm sitting there looking at this gun, there's suddenly all these cop cars start descending in the area. And I'm sitting there holding a gun, which was not a good thing to do. So I just stuck it back in the hedge and got back in my car and went to a payphone and called my father, woke him up, and told him everything I did. And so he said, flag down the cop. And so what happened was, they didn't call them carjackings back then, but someone had tried a carjacking, ended up shooting the guy in the car, shooting him in the head. So it was a pretty big crime. And so the police took me in. I left out a part. When the guy, after he hid the gun in the hedge, I saw him run about a half a block down and go into a bar. And so I was able to tell the police, this guy put the gun there and he went into this bar. And it was a biker bar. There's all these motorcycles out front. The guy I saw running had a beard and long hair and was wearing a t-shirt. He looked like a biker. So this was like 1973. So I don't know what the civil rights situation was then, but they just went into that bar and emptied it, arrested everybody in the bar, and brought them to the police station. And I spent all night looking at lineups, trying to identify the guy. And he probably went in the bar and went out the back because they didn't have him. And so anyway, I was assigned to this one kind of gruff detective, and he was very upset with me that I didn't identify somebody. He was sure, we know we have him. We cleared that whole bar. Which guy is it? I kept saying, you don't have him. And he thought I was like this kid that was afraid to make an ID or afraid to get involved. And that wasn't the case. And so that was it. Eventually my father came and said, let my son go, because they'd held me for like about 8 hours. And so I started reading the newspaper to see what happened, if they ever arrested anybody. And that led me to some true crime books. And then I started reading crime fiction. So it was really started with that one night. And then it was about 7 years later, I graduated from college with a journalism degree, and I got a job as a police reporter in my hometown. And I go into the detective bureau, and there's, his name was Phil Monday. There's Detective Monday, the guy who thought I chickened out on IDing someone, and we restarted the debate. I kept saying, you didn't have the guy. I said, yes, we had the guy. You were afraid to make an ID. So I never won him over on that.
I see Ron Green. Were you raising a hand or a finger?
No, but thanks for having me or doing this. It's great. Just one question, Michael, as you write books, do you have a process? I mean, I've heard some writers say they give themselves 3 hours in the morning and they're going to write 1,000 words or something a day. Do you have any kind of discipline like that, or does it just sort of come flowing out?
I don't have a quantity discipline like 1,000 words or how many pages. I don't have anything like that. But I start early, start while it's still dark. And what I want to do is move the story forward a step a day. And I know that if I do that, one step a day, I'll have a book in about 9 or 10 months. And what is a step? A step can be a chapter. A step can be one really good piece of dialogue, or it could be a moment where some revelation is made in the story. And I just want to feel comfortable that I move the story forward. And I don't care if I moved it forward 1,000 words or 50 words. I just want to know I moved it forward, and tomorrow I'll do it again. And that works out. You get into a flow, or you get a momentum. What happens in the writing process is what happens in the reading process. You want to get into a book, read it, and follow this momentum. And I really feel that that's what happens when you're writing them. And so it's always good at the end of the day to feel like, hey, I could have taken this another step, but it will be there tomorrow and easy for me to pick it up and keep going.
I'm looking around the room. Chris, and then Matt, and then we'll Matt, yours will be the last here. Let me just unmute. College friends here. Let's see. Okay, Chris.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Hi, Michael. Sam, thanks for inviting me. I am a Michael Connelly and Bosch newbie. My wife's been a huge fan for several years, so we have the whole series up, to, at least as much as there is yet so far here at the house, and she's been telling me I need to read it. So the Closers about 2 weeks ago, and loved it. Absolutely loved it. I'm one of those kind of people who tends to follow books in the order that they were written. Is that how you would recommend I approach the rest of that series, or matter?
I have a dilemma, because like I said earlier, you get better at what you do. So I've always had a hard time saying go back and read my first book, because I think I've gotten better. But I have to say, and this is pure ego, I just listened to my first book for the first time in 25 years, and I thought I was surprised. I thought it was okay, and I think it was a really good setting up of the character of Harry Bosch. So you might want to do that. I don't. The books are not constructed. There's only a few things that you would miss if you didn't read them in order, but nothing like extremely significant, in my opinion. And so I think the more recent books are probably more accomplished. You get better. I just feel more comfortable as a writer, and I feel more comfortable with what I leave in and what I take out. I think the first couple books had everything but the kitchen sink kind of quality to them. I wanted you to know everything about Harry Bosch, and now I'm a little bit more reserved about that. And I think it makes a better momentum in the reading process.
Now I'm motivated. I'll pick up the first one tonight. So thank you.
All right, cool.
And Matt, and I think we're approaching the hour. So this is, I'm sorry, Matt, I'm just going to unmute you here, but I'll get a little more deft at this. Are you unmuted?
Looks like it.
Yeah, Matt? Oh, no, sorry.
Wait.
We can't hear you. Let's see. Could your mute be?
I was double mute.
Oh, there we go.
I was double mute. Okay. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Michael, for participating in this. Fantastic. I grew up reading not crime novels, and Robert B. Parker was sort of my gateway guy, and I read actually A Savage Place, which takes place in LA, and Parker clearly a big fan of Raymond Chandler as well. So I really appreciate the LA as a character. I went to school with Sam at Occidental down in LA. And I haven't read all your books, but I love the transitioning characters that are in the book into their own story arcs. Fantastic. If someday I'll become an Amazon Prime member and watch the series, but fantastic. I really appreciate it. Thanks for laying this all out for us.
Sure. So I'm glad to be here. I think it was, and the title of this, We're All in It Together, I think is perfect. And I hope I get invited to the ones that follow, because I think Sam has the ability to put together some great people.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, and thanks for everybody who participated. And I do want to make it a regular thing, so I'm going to line up some great guests, but I could not have picked a better guest than Michael Connelly. And again, I just think he's a fantastic guy, obviously so generous with his time. So thank you very much. I'm going to unmute everyone, and if I can do this. Okay, there we go. I've unmuted everybody.
All right.
Actual
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet everybody, and stay safe.
Can Mike walk us through one more time what's coming this year? There's a book coming in the next month. There's the Bosch season, 7? 6. And then is there a book in the fall? I mean,
there's supposed to be, okay, I mean, the virus changes everything, but what the plan was, and probably still will be, is that the book Fair Warning will come out May 26th. The Bosch season 6 comes out April 17th. I'm just finishing, or I'm halfway through a Lincoln Lawyer book that's supposed to come out in the fall. And there's also supposed to be a Lincoln Lawyer TV show that comes out on CBS in September. Now, we were one day, they canceled, or not canceled, they postponed because of the virus the day before we start filming the first episode of the show. But the writing room is continuing, and they're hopeful that they'll start filming that in July and have enough episodes to start in September. So it's all up in the air, but that was the plan. It's going to be 2 books, 2 TV shows.
Wow.
And, which underlines that I'm the most lucky guy in the room at the moment. So pretty fortunate.
We're lucky. Yeah. Some upcoming guests that I want to have Dick and Susan, maybe independently, would love that. Would love that.
9 o'clock.
Who there you are in that corner of the screen, and Pete Siegel, who is the director of about a bunch of Adam Sandler's movies, including Tommy Boy and Longest Yard, and coming up next week as well. So I think it'll be really fun and great to have everybody convene for this. And please stay safe and wash your hands, and we'll flatten the curve. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sam.
Sam. Good night.
Thanks, Sam.
Night.
Bye.